In today's show, we'll be talking about the Athletics NBA offseason grades, how they rated each team's offseason moves. Then we'll be talking about how Shams Charania of ESPN has reported on the opening night games for the NBA and also the Christmas Day games as well, right here on You Don't Know Jack. All right, let's dive into this article. We're only going to talk about really some of the grades that catch my eye. If you want to go to see all the grades, go to The Athletic, go see each team grades for yourself. But the first one that catches my eye is the Boston Celtics. Obviously, they're one of the more predominant teams in the NBA, but they had a very strange offseason. They had to cut salary, so that means they lost Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Luke Kornet, and probably Al Horford. He's in the ecos. Like, he is just not signed with the team yet. Maybe he's considering retirement. There's been links to him with the Lakers, or of course, but we'll see where he goes. But for right now, they seem to somewhat be in a rebuilding phase. Obviously, with the Jason Tatum injury, that's probably what's going to happen. However, it's a tough place to be because they feel like they could be a middle team in the East this year. Not too bad, but not too great. And so they're probably not going to have, a lottery pick. So it's going to be interesting to see what other moves that they make. They got Anthony Simons back from the Blazers when they traded Drew Holiday. They didn't have to spend any draft capital in terms of, getting rid of those salaries, which is a great move by Brad Stevens. But they get a C- grade from The Athletic. I think that's a fine grade. Nothing too catchy. Didn't necessarily go too far into the rebuild because they should be back in 2026 with a full competitive team. That's what I expect, at least, as the East kind of gets back into form because it's in a shattered state right now. Speaking of another East team in the Eastern Conference, we have the New York Knicks. They didn't make too many splashy moves this offseason. Got Jordan Clarkson and Gorshan Yabusele. Those aren't any moves to kind of, ignore. It adds to their depth problem, kind of makes that into somewhat of a strength because their bench was a huge problem in the postseason. And so then they signed Mikal Bridges to a long-term extension. And so the Knicks are, in a really good spot, especially with, like I just said, the East kind of being in shambles. They could be the best team in the East heading into next season. It'll be interesting to see what kind of moves they continue to make and also at that All-Star break because that could be a huge wave of moves in the Eastern Conference as each team kind of feels like they have a chance to win that conference. Then another team that got graded that catch my eye was the Chicago Bulls. They were graded with the D+, the worst grade on this list maybe. And it was because they didn't really do much. They haven't, gone one way or another in terms of going all in or kind of going in full tank mode. And that's kind of where they've been at the last couple of years. They've been very stagnant. They've been around the play-in, and they maybe won a play-in game, but then get smoked in the second one. And they haven't made really any progress in either area. They drafted Noah Essengay with their pick, which a lot of people were surprised at. They didn't really extend anybody. They moved off Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro, which was a head-scratching move, not getting any draft assets for him. But Lonzo Ball's been dealing with injury concerns, so who knows where his basketball future lies. So, and if they can somewhat turn Isaac Okoro back into, a rejuvenated player, that could be a huge thing for Chicago as they try to get somewhat of an identity. They still haven't necessarily decided on what Josh Giddey is doing. I think they're kind of playing it right with taking their time with him. They don't want to sign him to too much money because I do think he's a very great offensive player. But what can he show on the defensive side of the ball? That's what kind of got him moved out of OKC. His three-point shot is also a little bit skeptical. So they're taking their time on that deal. So I'm very excited to see what moves the Bulls make to go in either direction. Because the D+ grade I think is totally valid because you haven't done much. You haven't decided where you are. And maybe they're like, the East is open this year. The Bulls aren't going to be one of the premier teams in the East, at least as of right now. Another grade that caught my eye was the Milwaukee Bucks. They were given a B, and I think this is the most controversial grade that you could have in this entire list because they waived and stretched their second best player in Damian Lillard. Now, yes, he tore his left Achilles. He wasn't going to play next season, and they are still in contender mode with a player like Giannis Antetokounmpo. They will always be a contender with Giannis on the roster. And so what they waived and signed him, and they signed Miles Turner. Now, the Miles Turner contract plus now the 20 mil, 25 mil dead cap money, that is the Damian Lillard contract, equivalent to having Dame still on the roster. And so really going at that, extending key players like a Kevin Porter Jr., a Gary Trent Jr., getting Torian Prince back, which is a low-key signing. He played big minutes for them last year. They got him on a cheap deal. I think they've had a really good offseason with what they could do, right? Miles Turner kind of fills in the hole that Brook Lopez had. He's a much younger player, can stretch the floor when Giannis dominates in the paint. I think that fit will work for the Bucks. It's just a real question mark on terms of the guard position. They got Cole Anthony on a deal. It was kind of like a gift given to them. Now he's coming off a down year in Orlando. Can he potentially steal some minutes away from those other guys in Milwaukee? I think that would be a great thing for the Bucks. I'll potentially move this grade up to a B+, but I'm fine with a B grade for the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, you can't talk about grades without talking about the Atlanta Hawks. The Athletic gave them an A grade, and I couldn't agree more. They got players like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luke Kennard, Kristaps Porzingis, out of cost of players that didn't necessarily do much for them. Terrence Mann, George Niang, Clint Capella in the 22nd pick in the NBA draft. That is a win. That is absolutely a win. They've rejuvenated their roster a little bit. I believe Trae Young is walking into the final year of his contract. So, are they running it back one more time with this roster and then seeing where they are with Trae Young? You risk losing him for nothing. Apparently right now on Twitter, there's been a lot of skeptical theories about what's happening with Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks. Could they trade him? That could be a massive move in terms of the whole NBA, and that would be a major step back for the Atlanta Hawks. But as it stands right now, A grade, rejuvenated their roster. They could potentially be fighting for the 4th seed, 5 seed in the Eastern Conference this year. They could be definitely one of the more up-and-coming teams in the East. The Magic were given an A- grade. Obviously, they made one of the bigger moves this offseason in trading for Desmond Bane. They gave up 4 first-round picks and 2 players in that deal. It is very much an all-in move, and I think it was a great move. They kind of filled the hole that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope didn't fill. He had a down year in Orlando. They needed him to, provide some shooting, some veteran leadership, and that just didn't happen. They move off him. They get a young player in Desmond Bane that is potentially even more well-rounded than KCP, a young player to really fill out this young roster that could potentially be the 1st seed in the East next year. I really like this roster. They got new assistant coaches. It really feels like all the things are going right for the Magic, and I agree with this grade because they seem like one of the premier teams in the Eastern Conference. And then as we move to the Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets are the first team on the list with an A+ grade. For the Athletic, they apparently won the offseason, and I could agree. I could very much agree. Getting a guy like Cam Johnson for a price of a first-round pick and Michael Porter Jr., I think that's an absolute win of a trade. You get a better player on a cheaper contract. That's really good. On the Brooklyn side of that deal, you potentially hope to get Michael Porter Jr., kind of rejuvenate him a little bit, maybe up his, trade value and then move off him for a couple picks as well. But they get guys like a Tim Hardaway Jr. on a minimum contract. They re-sign, Bruce Brown. They get Jonas Valanciunas. They've really built the depth on this roster and also get a new starter as well in Cam Johnson. Overall, a great offseason for Denver. They were only they took the NBA champs to 7 games. So I think with these moves, they could be the new premier team in the West. They definitely make a case for that with these moves and this offseason grade as well. The LA Clippers get an A- grade in this article. They had 2 issues kind of going into it. How do they maintain their success in the regular season, and then how do they translate that to postseason success? It's the 2nd year in a row they've lost in the first round. They kind of need something going. I mean, James Harden, they just re-signed him to a 2-year extension, but then they kind of needed to build their depth a little bit and ball handling outside of James Harden. They get that with Bradley Beal and Chris Paul, and they get guys like John Collins and Brook Lopez. This roster is actually very nice on paper. Now it's very old, right? That's the key. An A- grade, I would want to agree with that. They made deals that they could have, or that they could, right, to fill some needs. It'll be interesting to see how this team gels with all the old heads on this roster. Definitely one of, if not the most interesting team going into next season to see how they'll perform and kind of maintain their health through next season. So the Los Angeles Lakers got a B- grade. Not too flashy moves from the Lakers. Every move they make, though, will make headlines. One of the bigger ones was re-signing Luka Doncic to a 3-year deal, max contract. He was going to get that regardless. But the other moves are very fascinating in terms of getting DeAndre Ayton on a 2-year deal, Marcus Smart on a 2-year deal, Jake LaRavia on a 2-year deal. Those are the majority of their moves they made this season. Has that made their roster better? Yes. Has that made them true contenders? Maybe. It's a huge question mark. I love the Marcus Smart deal, getting him on, on a wave and stretch after he left Washington, right? They waved and stretched him. Now they get him for some backcourt defensive ability. That's great when especially your backcourt defensive ability is Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves. Get more of a veteran presence there as well. Then you get, a dominant center with the Lakers. A big question mark was how are they going to fix this problem? They get DeAndre Ayton. Now, he'll fit offensively. There's a bunch of videos you can watch on the fit there. I love it. But how's the defense going to play? Is he going to be a rim protector that they need in Los Angeles? That's a big question mark going into this season for the Lakers. But I think these moves are fine. I think they'll, right now, as their roster's constructed, be fighting around the 7 to 9 seed. So, not the best of moves, but they did what they could with their roster. Obviously, with the LeBron accepting his player option, putting a massive cap hold on that worth $50 million a year. It would have been interesting to see if LeBron declined and entered free agency and left, what their roster could look like right now with all that free cap space. But as it stands right now, I feel like they're still not done making moves. However, this is the grade they got with a B-. I think that's a fair grade to give the Lakers. The Athletic gave the Dallas Mavericks an A grade. Wow. I'm actually shocked by this because ESPN and other news sites give them, a C grade or a B grade because they lucked into Cooper Flag. Well, you still have to consider them getting Cooper Flag. Now, yes, they lucked into him. Wasn't really any of their well-doing to get him, but they got him. And that is a bona fide day one starter and with huge potential. That's one of the best free agent acquisitions or best offseason acquisitions you could have. And they got it. And then they sign a guy like D'Angelo Russell to a 2-year, $11 million deal. Great deal, especially as he's a placeholder for Kyrie Irving to get back. Speaking of Kyrie Irving, he declined his player option, but they re-signed him with a 3-year deal. They re-signed Daniel Gafford. They've maintained their roster. They signed a player that fills a hole, and they get a young and up-and-coming player to really rejuvenate some youth into this roster after trading Luka. It was a very old team, but now you get a young player, and you can see somewhat of a future with this team as they're kind of doing the both win now, win later strategy, which is definitely controversial, but an A grade, I completely agree with it. Yes, they lucked into Cooper Flag. If you take the Cooper Flag part out of it, I would still give this like a B, B+, just because getting a player like D'Angelo Russell, if they didn't have Cooper Flag, they would have a little bit more cap space. I would have been interested to see how they fill that hole at the guard position, because I still think it's a little bit of a hole in terms of playmaking, but obviously the huge question marks, when is Kyrie going to turn if he does? And so for an A grade, I think this is very acceptable for the Dallas Mavericks. The Houston Rockets made some of the biggest moves at this offseason. The Athletic gave them an A grade, which I definitely agree with, right? You were the second seed, and now you get Kevin Durant, who's now your best player. What? That's just absolutely insane. And it was a great move because they kind of needed a closer. They get it in Kevin Durant, but they also got guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Clint Capella. They kept key rotational guys in Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams, Jabari Smith Jr. This roster is deep, and it is very good in terms of their starting rotation. This is going to be one of the key players next season in the West, an A grade. I would maybe even give them an A+ grade because they absolutely killed it this offseason. I agree with this. Houston's going to be a top 4 seed next season. I'm excited for it. Then, to finish off this article, the San Antonio Spurs got a B+ grade. They were rumored to be in the Kevin Durant, the Giannis Antetokounmpo sweepstakes, but they didn't enter them. They didn't make any trade of the sort. They had the second pick. They kept it. They drafted Dylan Harper out of Rutgers. Give him a nice young guard. They did extend De'Aaron Fox to a max contract, which had a little bit of people raising eyebrows like, is this a good move? But at the end of the day, they could always trade De'Aaron Fox because the salary cap will keep going up. That won't be a terrible deal in the next couple of years. And they also got a guy in the draft in Carter Bryant. That's a defensive monster. If you didn't see some really highlights, he is still a massive question mark on the offensive side of the ball. But with how this roster looks at the guard position, but also with Victor Wembanyama, offense isn't necessarily an area he needs to perform in, but he could be a liability. But he makes up for it on the defensive side of the ball. They got in a guy like Luke Cornett to kind of back up Victor when he potentially misses time this season. And so I really like this team. They didn't rush to make any super massive trade, which could have, set them back, especially if it was unsuccessful, because I think the Spurs are in a position to potentially be competing, for years to come. Maybe it's not next season, but it's the season after, and the season after that, and the season after that. So they're at a really nice spot with their roster as a whole. It's young, it's somewhat deep. I think they can still have room to improve, but I don't think they want to hurry this process, especially as Victor Wembanyama, quickly improves. I think they have a year until they really push all the chips in to go all in. So I think B+ grade is absolutely merited here. I would have to agree with it because they didn't rush anything, but they still got better, which unlike other teams like the Bulls can't say that they did, right? Or the Pelicans. I didn't talk about them, but they got a D grade. They had a very questionable offseason. But that's for another time. But that'll do it for this Athletic article. So as we get closer to the start of the NBA season, Shams Charania of ESPN has announced not only the opening day games, but also Christmas. Let's start with the opening night games first. So the big ones is going to be the Houston Rockets visiting the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Golden State Warriors at the Los Angeles Lakers. But let's talk a little bit about this Houston Rockets and Oklahoma City Thunder game. This is going to be crazy because Kevin Durant, obviously he's on the Rockets now, and they're going to travel to Oklahoma City to see their banner get raised. And if you don't remember, Kevin Durant won an MVP with the Thunder back in 2012, 2014. That's going to be absolutely bogus. It's going to be so funny. Hopefully this game should be a show because it's two of the more competitive teams in the West. Both teams are going to finish, I believe, in the top 4 of that conference. I'm super excited about this matchup. Kevin Durant returning to Oklahoma City. He's obviously already returned there. He's on now his 5th team, I believe, or 4th team since Oklahoma City. It's going to be a great matchup. Obviously, the Thunder are going to come back to, really show that, hey, we're not only a one-time winner, we could potentially win it again. And so I'm super excited about this matchup. Obviously, you get, Kevin Durant versus a young OKC team. It's kind of like the old head, the former great versus the new great in SGA. Some people are kind of, comparing their both resumes as Thunder players. Some people are now saying SGA is now the greatest Thunder of all time, which is definitely an argument, if you especially look at his accolades in terms of winning an NBA championship and also the MVP last season, a feat that Kevin Durant didn't do with the Thunder. He did win an MVP, but he never won a championship. So this could be a huge win also for the Houston Rockets. If they can win this game, their, presence will be announced. They could be really taken seriously because a lot of people are like, oh, they'll be good, but how good is the question, right? If they win this game, it could potentially start all the narratives in terms of them being the favorite in the West, as people are kind of shying away from picking, back-to-back champs because it's not as flashy online. But I still think OKC is one of the best teams in the NBA, if not the best. And so this could also be a game where they're like, no, you're not even close to us. You're not in our league. We're looking to go back-to-back while you're looking to win a playoff series, which I don't think the Rockets have done since 2019 or 2020 to say the least. So that's a great night 1 game of the NBA. Another one is Golden State versus Los Angeles. You get a Curry-LeBron matchup potentially for the last time, or not the last time, but one of the last times, as this could be LeBron's last season. This was very shocking to me, to say the least, though, because it feels like they're always kind of pushing Dallas versus the Lakers with the Luka trade. But no, they're like, let's go all in with Golden State versus Los Angeles. Obviously, Los Angeles is kind of a new team right now, with Luka Doncic kind of being the main guy, getting DeAndre Ayton, getting Marcus Smart. Will they, play into that? Or they're going to play into the LeBron being the guy, right? Obviously, Curry LeBron brings a tons of viewers, so I see it. But it's also like, you're going to get a lot of viewers on night 1 of the NBA. Like, you just will, because a lot of people are excited. It's like similar to night 1 or that Thursday night kickoff game of the NFL. Who cares who's playing? It will get watched because it's the first game of the NFL season. But I think they're double dipping on their odds here, be like, yes, it's the first night, but it's also, Lakers versus the Warriors, LeBron versus Curry. Why not? Now, obviously, the Warriors have yet to make any big moves this offseason. They still got Curry, though, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green. The Jonathan Kuminga situation is kind of weird. I'm going to assume he's going to remain a Warrior. There's rumors of him being traded, but let's assume he's on the Warriors. This could be actually a very good matchup because I think both these teams are in the same area when it comes to the West. The Lakers, I think, are definitely better and have a higher ceiling than the Warriors do, but these games are always fun, exciting, and if it's one of the last times we see Curry LeBron, I'm all here for it. Let me know what you guys think of these opening night matchups for the 2025-2026 NBA season. I think they cooked here, and then night 2 is kind of all the other teams play. I know Dallas playing San Antonio for the third time to kick off a season. That's going to be interesting with Victor Wembanyama versus Cooper Flagg, and then also it's the first and second pick, Dylan Harper versus Cooper Flagg. A lot of storylines there. So I'm super excited for these opening night matchups in the NBA. But also, it has been announced of the Christmas Day games. It's 5 games always on Christmas, so 10 teams get to play. And there's definitely some shocking matchups here, to say the least. The first one on that day slate is going to be the Cavs versus the New York Knicks. I think this is an absolute great matchup because I think these teams are going to be top 3 in the East. I do think this could have been a chance to put Orlando instead of Cleveland potentially, but New York was going to make it because they're a big market team, and Cleveland's going to be there because they're the reigning first seed in the East. So totally think it's a merited matchup, but again, this is going to be huge in terms of narratives, especially at this point in the season, because this will get closer to the middle point. You're kind of 1/3 in at this point of the NBA. And so are the Cavs going to back up their performance last regular season and continue to be the 1 seed? Or is this the time where the New York Knicks really kind of separate themselves from the pack in the East and kind of stamp themselves as the best team or the team to beat in the East? This is a great first matchup to start in the Christmas Day slate. However, this is the only Eastern Conference game, meaning it's the only team that consists of an East team playing on Christmas, which is interesting. It kind of just shows you where the NBA is as a whole. Very West heavy. The East is kind of broken right now, so I don't blame them. I kind of would have loved to see Orlando here, though, I think they're going to be really good this year. However, are they going to be better than the Cavs or the Knicks? Last season, it's technically a different story, so basing this off last season, I agree with this matchup. Then the second game will be the San Antonio Spurs at the Thunder. Thunder being the defending champs, they'll play on Christmas. But then the Spurs, second time they're playing on Christmas. I believe they played New York last year. Victor Wembanyama played. So this is going to be 2 young teams going at it. This is actually a very fascinating matchup. I do think the Thunder are going to be heavily favored in this one. However, it's a Chet versus Wemby matchup again. And those are always very interesting. 2 big men in the draft, drafted. One was drafted first overall, the other one second overall. I'm super excited to see how this draft plays out, or this game plays out, because I think it could be another close game, as most of these games are going to be, in my opinion. However, this could be a chance for the Spurs to accelerate kind of their progression. But at the end of the day, I think the Thunder are just deeper than the Spurs, and this could be potentially the most boring game on this slate. Has the lowest floor for sure out of all of these games. Then you go to the Rockets at the Lakers. Kevin Durant versus LeBron. Those are always fun matchups. And again, it's kind of a new upcoming West team. Now I know they were the 2nd seed last year, but they have a different feel about them this year. They have upside, it feels like, this year, whereas the Rockets were kind of unknown, and they definitely exceeded expectations last year. However, this year, they're kind of going all in, which is obviously great for narratives as well. But this is a chance for the Lakers to kind of build up their momentum in terms of being a top contender. This, I think, has high potential for being the best game of the slate. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully both teams are healthy for this one, because it's definitely another star-studded matchup. I think the Lakers may have the betting odds in their favor for this one, especially being at home. But again, star-studded matchup. LeBron versus KD, Luka versus whoever. But regardless, I love this matchup. Middle spot, I think it's good. Usually the Lakers play a little bit later because they are on the West Coast. As you'll see with the rest of these games, they're most Pacific time, regardless of Denver being Mountain time. So it's later games, but we'll see how the timing works out for all of these. I'm assuming this is the order, but we're just going to have to take a Shams' word for it as of right now. Then we go to the Dallas Mavericks visiting the Golden State Warriors. The first thing that catches your mind is Klay Thompson returning. Again, he's already returned, but Klay Thompson versus Curry, that's a great matchup. But then you also have the Christmas debut of Cooper Flagg, right? Kyrie's probably not going to be back for this game, which is a little disappointing. But then I think kind of evens it out even a little bit more. Draymond versus AD. A lot of storylines going into this one. This is just going to be a good game, I believe. Again, it has a lower floor in terms of, the quality of the basketball. However, I think with Cooper Flagg, he's going to be the main storyline. Cooper Flagg versus Curry. A lot of teams are talking trash on Twitter already about this matchup. You have Jimmy Butler, Curry, Draymond, versus Cooper Flagg, AD, and Klay Thompson. This is going to be another star-studded matchup, as all these games are. However, this could be one where are the Dallas Mavericks playing good basketball, right? Because I think the Warriors are going to be struggling going into this game a little bit. I think Dallas could potentially have, the same potential. However, it could be one where one team really needs a win here, and they're both kind of desperate at this point. And so one team exceeds the other, and now they kind of separate themselves from the pack, similar to the Lakers-Rockets game. And so I'm very interested to see also Cooper Flagg's debut, but also how the Mavericks and Warriors kind of enter this game, because that could really be the narrative of this one. Then to end it off, potentially, it's Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Denver Nuggets. Timberwolves didn't make too many moves this offseason. They re-signed their guys. Denver obviously, was coming off a great offseason. This is another, rematch of post-playoff, in the Western Conference semifinals 2 years ago. And so I think this is going to be a great matchup. Anthony Edwards versus Jokic. I do think Denver has clearly the better team this time around. And so I would say this could be very heavily in Denver's favor. However, if they bring back the Christmas Day uniforms, this game could have a whole lot of aura to it. I think Anthony Edwards is going to want to win on Christmas Day again potentially for the second year in a row. He defeated the Dallas Mavericks last year, and so he could end up spoiling the Denver Nugget fans' Christmas. Which when Anthony Edwards gets a little bit in his villain phase, this is going to be a very fun game to watch, especially if the new look Denver Nuggets look like the new look Denver Nuggets, especially if they're playing on all cylinders with their still same frame, but newly constructed roster, which is going to be very fun to watch, because I think both these teams are going to think that they're contending teams, and one team I think will come out on top of this one feeling way more confident than the other. So that'll do it for this NBA Christmas Day schedule. Also with the opening night schedule, let me know what your guys' thoughts are on both these day slates of NBA content. I'm super excited. There's also a major problem with the NBA facing Christmas. I'll talk about that later this week, because I think it's a big argument that we're not necessarily having right now, and that has to do with the NFL taking over Christmas. And so make sure you subscribe so you get notified when that comes out as well. So that'll do it for today's episode of You Don't Know Jack. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Go over to the YouTube if you want the video form of this podcast. It's very fun. I also upload sub videos for nice little packages of You Don't Know Jack goodness. So make sure you go over to the YouTube and subscribe. But also just leave a like and a rating wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps me out. It takes less than 10 seconds. And it really helps me out. It makes me appreciate you guys for listening. Anyways, have a great day. I'll see you guys again later this week.